Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Levin. I'm a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion, and I'm here with Catherine Ann Edwards. She is an independent policy consultant, labor economist, writes for us here at Bloomberg Opinion. Also, Guy Berger. He is the director of economic research at the Burning Glass Institute. We're here to talk about jobs. The pace of payroll additions has been cooling in the U.S., and there's still some concern, understandably, that the cooling could go a bit too far. We have to acknowledge layoffs have remained quite low, but hiring in particular remains weak. With a growing labor force, some folks think that it may be insufficient, that hiring, to prevent further increases in the unemployment rate. That brings us to today. The median forecaster in the Bloomberg survey expects about 150,000 jobs were added to non-farm payrolls, and the unemployment rate is expected to hold steady at 4.2% for this month of September. The range, however, very interesting. It stretches from 70,000, that's Andrew Holenhorst at Citigroup, way up to 220,000 from Jefferies. So really a lot of uncertainty. People are struggling to understand what's going on in this labor force. And add to that the fact that we've been seeing very large revisions to the payroll data. So there's bound to be some questions as to whether or not we even want to take at face value the numbers that we see today. Let me pass it over to Guy for a little bit of a preview here. Guy, you're one of the labor market watchers who thinks that this cooling could yet have a little ways to go. Could you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think I think we're in a situation with hiring coming down as it has, that there's a certain dynamic built in where labor demand is not keeping up with labor supply. That unemployment is going up pretty steadily, not by huge amounts. I still call this non-recessionary because we're not seeing like big leaps upward. We're just seeing it creep up by like a few hundredths of a percentage point each month, and that's going to add up over a sufficiently big length of time. The good news is the Fed's stepping in, so at some point hiring will stop falling, that unemployment rates will stop rising. But I think we're probably going to top out early next year. I mean, if we're lucky, not much higher than 4.5%, but maybe a little higher than that.
Okay. Catherine Ann, what about you? You know, you and I were together for this report last month, I think, and we had a discussion where you were hoping that the Federal Reserve would move 50 basis points to shore up the labor market here. They've gone ahead and done that, but of course, these things take a while to have the proper effect. Do you feel any more confident today, at least knowing that this Federal Reserve is signaling the right intentions to have this labor markets back?
Yeah, well, this is the little bit of bewitching, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If they had dropped by 25, maybe that wouldn't have been enough for the labor market. But if they drop by 50, maybe people actually start to get a lot more concerned about the labor market because they went down by 50. I mean, there's so much of almost like a game theory guessing of what does it mean when every number is released and how they act relative to how we should think. But it's worth just recognizing that in a lot of ways, we're in a really historic moment, for the economy and even in the scope of our broad World War II, post-World War II economic history. And it's okay to not know which way that this is going to go right now, because we don't have, we haven't been here 15 times before. And I think we're all hoping for the best, but that range of job growth that you gave to me was exactly spot on with the sentiment right now of just still not understanding what comes next. We were waiting for the interest rate cut for so long. What comes next didn't talk about as much.
For sure. And so again, as we head into this number, the consensus is that we will see 150,000. I guess I use the term consensus loosely. That's the median there. The expectation is that 125,000 of those are going to come from private, but so many moving parts here. We had seen a large contribution over the past year from things like health and education. That may be slowing. So as this number comes out in just a moment, we're really going to dig in the weeds here for you. But it should be with us in just one moment. So there you go. Wow.
Ooh,
So a very positive
nice.
surprise. 254,000 jobs, non-farm payrolls in the month of September. A big chunk of that again coming from private, 223,000. Let's see. Let's take you to the unemployment rate, a drop to 4.1%. So, I mean, you got to love to see that. There was so much concern just about the momentum. We talked so much about the SAM rule, and that once we reached that 0.5 percentage point move in the 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate, that it felt like that negative energy was just going to feed on itself. But since then, we've had a tick back in the other direction. Guy, let me hand it over to you. What's your snap reaction here?
I mean, this is great. I mean, I was talking about what I was worried about, but we obviously moved in the opposite direction. I mean, maybe this. I mean, there's always noise month to month in every report, so I obviously wouldn't declare victory here. But the way I think about it is great. I mean, I think this sort of makes the Fed feel a little better, that it buys them more time for policy. I mean, this is like before policy would kick in. I mean, there's some anticipation effects, but I think this gives them some be the sigh of relief that policy has more time to work. They're not falling. If to a degree they're maybe a little behind the curve, maybe or less behind the curve or on the curve now. So great. This is fantastic. It makes me happy. By the way, prime working age employee population ratio is holding in that post 2001 level of 80.9%. So that's, I think, good news as far as I can tell. It's still there, which is delightful.
And it's 5:30 in the morning where you are. Does this energize you?
Yeah, it's a nice start to the day. I'm happy to see it.
Yeah. What about you, Catherine Ann? And by the way, I just want to point out too, there was so much concern in recent months about the revisions and the fact that you couldn't take it at face value. We have positive revisions coming with this number. So I mean, big smiles all around. First blush. What do you think, Catherine Ann?
I mean, you love to get a good jobs report. This is a great day for American workers. And the positive revision is a steady reminder that, the BLS is very good at what they do, given how dramatically underfunded they are. But that this, they err in both directions. And so we had been seeing the downward revision, and that kind of puts us in this, very myopic setting of like, oh, they're always wrong on the, on the downside, but they are wrong on the upside too. And this type of revision is what you would expect. So this is an excellent day for workers. What I hope is that this translates to an uptick in hiring. And hiring has been falling for so long. We're now at levels in hiring rates that are like mid 2007 recession, right? We're getting on the winter of 2008 for just how few hires there are relative to the number of workers in the economy. And so I'm looking at this job number, and I'm looking forward to jolts in a few weeks. I want to see this go up.
Yeah. Well, so let's go there. I mean, the very, very tricky thing about here is about this labor market and understanding what's actually going on is that you have complex and in some ways unprecedented supply dynamics going on at the same time that you have complex demand dynamics. And for a while, things like immigration were playing a major role here. But as you say, Catherine Ann, that hiring, sort of the ratio of people being hired to the broader to the overall labor market had been quite weak. Guy, what do you think we need to sort of get to a place where recent college graduates, recent high school graduates, recent labor market entrants in general are finding a welcoming labor market when they go out there? What could shake something loose here?
Well, I mean, the first thing is I think that just generally, since we are talking about that group, which I'm worried about, people that are finishing school entering the labor market, it's worth mentioning that, for example, this group of 24-year-olds, their employment population ratio did go up in September relative to August. It hasn't recovered all of its recent decrease, but improved. So there was good news for them too. I think this is something that I really spent a lot of time thinking about because Catherine has made, I think, a really good point that it is a tremendous blessing that layoffs have been so low in this current cycle and that most of the adjustments happening through hiring because being laid off is so disrupted. Um, but it does raise a set of problems that we're not really used to thinking about. We sort of worried about what are people that lose their jobs going to do, and we're not seeing many of those. But the people that do lose their jobs are experiencing more distress than they would be experiencing the typical cycle because hiring is so low. People that are finishing college or high school and looking for a job are experiencing more distress than they would be. You know, when we talk to job seekers, they actually talk a lot, and Catherine does this a lot on her TikTok. Like gaslighting is a very common term. Everybody's talking about how good the economy is, and they don't see it, and they actually don't see it because it's, again, if you're in a situation where you need a job, this is a bad economy. This is a bad economy for that metric alone. It doesn't matter that unemployment's low because you're unemployed and you need a job. And
Right.
it's hard to find it. And I think that's really it. It's different, and it raises its own set of policy problems. Like, what is an economy where you have a job, you're safe, but if you don't have a job, it's really hard to find one? How does policy adjust? And Catherine's actually the expert here, so I'm very curious for her opinion on that.
Yeah,
Well,
take it away, Catherine.
you know, it's a very unfortunate part of federal policy that we have essentially abandoned the idea of modern, relevant, strong unemployment insurance. You know, we designed unemployment insurance in Wisconsin in 1932, and that is the model that we've stuck with since. And states have been given about 50 years of runway to prove that they will not maintain this program. And they don't really have that much creativity that they can put into the exigencies of a modern labor market. You know, we have been waiting for federal leadership on this issue for so long. And I think that it's something that businesses probably have very strong opinions on how they expect support to work for the unemployed, that workers have opinions on how unemployment can work for them. This idea that you get a weekly benefit for somewhere between 1 in Georgia and 26 weeks, you know, that's not what unemployment looks like anymore. And so not only are people, you know, the rock might be the low hiring place, but the hard place is an unemployment system that essentially ignores their existence. So we, you know, they're definitely feeling it on both fronts. You know, people who are having a hard time getting hired right now. It's also worth saying, you know, just I know that there are data people on the call. The unemployment rate is based on workers who are actively looking for work over the prior 4 weeks in the survey. People who are in like fits and spurts of application can fall in and out of the unemployed really quickly and very easily as well. So you are, you know, your unemployment rate amongst kind of frustrated job seekers is probably where it has the hardest time capturing with the most accuracy because their behavior doesn't really fit this idea of a 4-week search period, right? You look for every single job that exists, you put in all the applications, and then you wait. Well, then you fall out of the unemployed and you're out of the labor force. And not for nothing, half of all hires tend to come from people out of the labor force and not the unemployed. So I think there's room to be, I think, suspicious on their behalf of this 4.1% unemployment rate, to think about who is not being captured, you know, given what we see in hiring.
Right.
These are all very good questions for policymakers. They don't seem too inclined to answer on the congressional front.
So
Right.
it's, oh, sorry. I was going to jump in, by the way, because one thing
Please,
that I
please.
always look at every month is the distribution unemployed by the reason. It's like, in my opinion, one of the most underrated parts of the report. And what's interesting about this cycle and ties in with this weird angle on hiring is there's this, what I call is the unemployed due to permanent layoff, which is really in most recessions, even though layoffs don't drive, are not the thing that really picks up, it's the decline in hiring that causes things to get worse. People that are laid off just can't find jobs, and that's the big problem. And what's interesting is it has not budged all year. It didn't budge this month, by the way, either. And I think a lot of the decline actually happened in this category of entrance and new entrants. When you look at it, like that fell, and it's noisy, small CPS subsamples. But I do think it's that group is, again, to me, deserves a lot more. We think a lot about the people who have lost their jobs. I think we need to think there's a lot of scholarship that needs to be done about who these re-entrants and new entrants are, how they're experiencing it. We kind of always think, oh, labor market entry is good. But if people are coming in or re-entering and they can't find jobs for a long time, that's not good. If we're in a situation where just a bunch of 20, 24-year-olds are all piling up waiting for jobs and they spend like way longer than usual looking for jobs, or have people that basically thought, you know what, I'll use my severance and I'll come back afterwards, or I'll just take a break and come back, and they can't find jobs, that is also not a sign of a labor market that's working the way we would like it to.
Yeah, but again, it's not a direction we're used to seeing.
Yep.
The US has been a turnover model of employment for so long, quick to hire, quick to fire, and we're used to just lots of churn. This drop in hiring could indicate a similar drop in the propensity to lay off, and we're just seeing the front end or the back end rather than the front end. But that could be a win for workers to be less likely to be laid off, to have a little bit more conservative approach to employment. But that puts front and center how hard it is to get a job.
Yeah. I did go ahead and put up the decomposition of the unemployment rate, so folks can sort of follow along. And so we do get this small tick down to 4.1%. It seems from our decomposition like a lot of the drop came from smaller number of workers who are unemployed because they completed temporary jobs. You don't see a lot of movement in the other kinds of contributions. I'll also, since we're here, take it to some of the demographic breakdowns, so we can see that Guy flagged this earlier, but you see a big step down in the contribution to unemployment from those young people, the 20 to 24 cohort. That's again interesting, because there had been this sense, and I'm definitely not saying that this problem has gone away from one month to the next, but there had been this sense that people were finishing school and they just couldn't get that foot in the door. It was a great labor market if you were in it, but a real bummer of a labor market if you were on the outside looking in. So maybe some slight room for optimism from that cohort. And also, interestingly, you see a little bit of a wiggle of a tick down in the contribution to unemployment from the 55 and over cohort. Let me, if I could, put on my uber optimist hat here, though, for a second. I think we have to observe that a lot of things in this economy have been really, really good. I know, look good in the macro data, feel good. They're sort of different dynamics, but I mean, GDP has been pretty incredible, right? Doing better than what most people thought potential was for a while. Productivity is hard to read, but it sure looks like productivity is improving. Inflation, you got a 2.2% on the headline PCE recently. And the only issue that you really could have consistently pointed to in the hard data has been this labor market dynamic, and the idea that while the level of unemployment wasn't too bad, the momentum was a little concerning. We now have, at least 1 month. Always take 1 month with a grain of salt, but we now have some evidence to hang our hat on that maybe even that hand wringing was a little overdone. So, I mean, is it possible we're seeing the beginnings of a very, very optimistic economic story here?
Is this recorded? I mean, how are we? Is someone going to play this back if we're like, yeah, and then
Absolutely,
there's
they will. Absolutely, they will.
I just want to know that I'll make it onto a highlight reel of like economists and barristers as ourselves.
I mean, I started it, so if anybody's going to take the blame, it's me.
I mean, I think this to me is the most important lesson about economic policy, is that there's, policymakers have room to maneuver. And if you think about where the economy was 2 years ago, where you have basically every economist, willing to go on TV saying a recession is coming, that type of sentiment matters, but policymaking can matter more. And I think that this is definitely a period where we can set back. Maybe I'm less optimistic about what's coming because I don't like making forecasts, but I am very impressed with where we've been. This kind of doom and gloom, we have to tip into a recession. Unemployment has to get to the sixes in order to beat this. Policy making was firing on all cylinders. They said the right things, they did the right things, and we were able to get out of this. And I think that is, if there is wind in our sails, it is coming from the outcomes that we avoided over the past 2 years. And again, that to me is a big lesson for what policymakers can accomplish. Now I'm kind of like, so let's put that towards positive action for making the economy more robust and inclusive going forward, and not just put all of our best work to avoiding recession. Let's build a better business cycle. We can use policymaking there as well.
Okay. Well, hey, while we're there, let me just ask you. You've been writing a lot about policy. You had a really interesting piece about the minimum wage recently. You've done some really great writing about childcare, which obviously has major spillovers for the labor market in many ways. What are you hearing in the policy discussion at the presidential politics level that you think could make some real difference here, Catherine Ann?
I mean, this is the first presidential campaign where people have been talking about childcare, that it's come up in multiple debates, in multiple avenues. What is your childcare plan? I mean, that was not the world we lived in 8 years ago. So we are in a different world now, in which the idea that childcare needs some intervention is now basically at top of mind instead of on the back burner. Just to make sure I mix as many metaphors as possible here. I am an economist, so like I'm really I'm trying new things. I think the other thing that I hear is that you can look up the number of pieces of legislation introduced. I mean, there's over 100 bills related to childcare right now. Congress can sense that this is something that's frustrating families, that people want to see action on it. And I think something is going to happen within the next 2 to 4 years. I don't know how much that depends on who wins. I think the quality of the policy probably depends on who wins. Republicans have a deference for fixing everything possible through a tax credit, which is simply incapable of addressing deep-rooted market failures, which is where childcare is. So I think whatever happens over the next 4 years, we're going to get movement on childcare. Your Republicans are going to do kind of like a minor tweak through the tax credit, which won't help most people, won't fix market failures, won't create supply, won't really do anything, but will help some people afford it if they have a low enough tax liability. And Democrats have a wide variety of plans of basically how to take over the market provision of childcare. So something is coming. I couldn't tell you what. I'm, again, not that great at prediction, but I know that there's a lot of movement on Capitol Hill about this. This is a problem they want a win on.
Okay. As we sort of will wind down here, our last 7 or 8 minutes, I want to get a little bit forward looking here. I think, reasonably, we've focused a lot on the bear case for the labor market in recent months, and as we were talking about earlier, the fact that it's a very tough labor market for folks that are on the outside looking in. But Guy, what do you think about the thesis that, maybe this labor market is actually kind of a coiled spring that's poised for a big bounce back? I mean, you could argue that some firms have been holding off because we're in a presidential election year. They want to see some of their uncertainty from a policy standpoint resolved before they make hiring decisions. Maybe some folks were holding off because they wanted to see interest rates cuts start to come, which they are coming. We don't know how fast, but they are coming. I've even seen the argument made. I don't know what you think of this, but I've seen the argument made that our productivity gains, our recent spurt of productivity gains in the very short run, allows firms to sit on their hands. But as we know, in the medium to longer term, the sign in productivity is typically similar to the sign in hiring. So what do you think? I mean, is there, I'm trying not to overdo it on one report here, but there is a pretty nice bull case here, isn't there?
Well, so here's my perspective. The first is the productivity story is a great one. So there's no doubt about it. I think that my optimistic case based on this report is it buys monetary policy, a lot of runway. I think that I always describe this as sort of a race between, or at least coming into today, that between like a very slow, gradual deterioration in the labor market and the monetary policy that's eventually going to stop it. And this gives monetary policy room to catch up. If the labor market does turn out to be stronger, this is the first in the string of stronger reports, and then actually also manifest in better hiring data and the JOLTS reports to come. I think that's going to have a feedback loop that leads to less Fed easing. So I think in the end, the way I think about it is the Fed wants to stop additional downside in the labor market, but they don't want much additional upside either. So the upside, for example, to hire, if it's a terrible time to be hired right now, it could improve a little bit, but it's not going to improve by a lot because the Fed, the last thing the Fed wants is to get back to an overheated labor market, unless over time the inflation data just continue, and maybe productivity buys the room for that. We start getting, I'm not an inflation expert, but I do follow it. All of us labor market people have had to suddenly become interested in inflation.
Learned a lot.
Against their will. If inflation gets better, and it will need to get better by like still a little bit above target, but we reach a world where the Fed starts feeling really good. They're not going to overshoot inflation. That gives them a little more license, like the late 20 teens, to say, or how about we let the labor market run a little hotter? But that's going to take a while. And so I think we're going to be in this world where good news is good news because it buys time. There's no risk of recession. Unemployment, maybe in a few months, I'm telling you, I don't think the unemployment is going to top up above 4.5% anymore because we start getting a run of good news. But it can't be, it's never going to be great news for a while because the Fed really was so burned by inflation in 2022. They do not want the economy and labor market running wild or hot. They just want it to not. They keep saying they think that we're in a good place and they want to stay there and they want policy to keep it there. But it also means they don't want it. It's in a good place. They don't want it to get to a bad place, but it's a good place. They don't want to get to a great place either for the time being.
Okay, so I think in reference to your earlier question about are we at the dawn of a new era, do we have reason to be so optimistic? If we were to look back on this recording 2 years from now and say we were right, we were optimistic, what is the number that we are looking at that has convinced us that we entered a new golden era of the US labor market? That number is going to be wage growth. I mean, if you look at wages in the 1980s, after just that horrible bout with inflation, steamrolling into 2 recessions, there is a decline in real wages, up to like the 60th percentile, and the bottom 20% are just absolutely brutally takes so long to recover. I mean, the 80s is such a lost decade for so many parts of the labor market. We have beaten back the spike of inflation, but now the task is we have to outgrow it. So many people have seen their real earnings power decrease. Their wages are increasing. You've got this little fight over how much is rising month to month, wages versus prices. But for that story to be good for most American households, wages need to have strong growth for the next 2 years. And that's the only way inflation for Americans will feel like it has been put behind them, when they don't feel it in their pocketbook anymore because their wages have gone up. That is what I'm looking for most. And this goes to Guy's point of how hot can we run the labor market? I mean, we need to get wages up. We need Americans to be able to afford their life again. And I don't know how fine of a line they're going to draw with wages, because it doesn't have the same type of implications as a high unemployment rate. I mean, the Fed spends many, many decades quite comfortable with anemic wage growth for the majority of Americans. So this is I'm optimistic that we can beat it, but I want them to focus on this now. I want this to be the goal. We have to put this era to bed, and we can only do that when wage growth is high enough.
Yeah, it's amazing how little the Fed's thinking about wage growth, by the way, based on press conference. Like, it came up briefly at the press conference a little bit, and Powell described it as a little high, by the way, relative to source, but not very much. But the Fed's brain has moved on.
Yeah, this is my worry. And Congress doesn't really seem like leadership in economic policy is something that they're interested in. I mean, we need, we have so many decades long issues that are kind of cooking and coming to the surface that the Fed can't do everything. And if they're not focused on wages, I can understand them saying well, that part is not my job. So that is what will define the optimism going forward.
All right. So it's all about wages, says Catherine Ann Edwards. I think we're going to leave it right there. We're just running up against the 30-minute mark. fantastic labor market report today. Of course, it's a complicated market, a complicated economy. I have up on our screen the 2-year yield, which has moved up notably on this. But I think a lot of that is people saying, the risk of a recession has meaningfully declined from an already relatively muted level. So a lot to like in this report. Thank you very much, Catherine Ann Edwards. Thank you very much, Guy Berger. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all. Cheers.